Please be seated, everyone, and good morning to you all. It is so wonderful to see so many of you here today for what is really, I believe, going to be a very important day in the life of our church. I want to start my session with you this morning by reading out to you a parable. It's not a parable that you will find in the Bible. It is actually a parable that was written by a man named Theodore O. Whedon back in 1953. And this parable is highly relevant to what we're talking about today. And the parable is the parable of the life-saving station. Some of you might have heard of it, others of you might not have. But let me read it out. On a dangerous seacoast where shipwrecks often occur, there was once a crude little life-saving station. The building was just a hut, and there was only one boat, but the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea. And with no thought for themselves, they went out day or night, tirelessly searching for those who were in peril. This wonderful little station saved so many lives that it became famous. Some of those saved and various others in the surrounding areas wanted to become associated with the station. And so they gave their time, money, and effort to support its work. They bought new boats and trained new crews. The scope of this little life-saving station began to grow. Some of the new members of the life-saving station were unhappy that the building was so crude and so poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided as the first refuge for those who were saved from sea. So they replaced the emergency cots with beds and put better furniture in an enlarged building. Well, as time went on, the life-saving station became a favourite gathering place for its members. And they redecorated it beautifully and furnished it as a sort of club. Fewer of the members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do this work. The purpose of life-saving was still discussed, but most of the team were too busy or lacked the necessary commitment to take part in the life-saving activities personally. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, and half-drowned people. They were dirty and sick. Some had a different skin colour. Some spoke a very strange language. And the beautiful new club was considerably messed up. So the property committee immediately had a shower built outside the club where the victims of shipwreck could be cleaned up before coming inside. At the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities, as it was unpleasant and a hindrance to the members' regular program. But some members insisted that life-saving was their primary purpose and pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station. But they were finally voted down and told that if they wanted to save the lives of various people who were shipwrecked in those waters, then they could begin another life-saving station down the coast. So they did. Well, as the years went by, the new station experienced the same changes that happened in the old station. They evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station began. If you visit the seacoast today, you will find many exclusive clubs along that shore. Shipwrecks are still frequent in those waters, But today, most of those people drown. Now, this parable of the life-saving station, as I said, was written by Theodore O. Whedon. Theodore O. Whedon was a church minister. And he really came up with this parable to talk about what happens to churches. What happens to churches as they forget the Great Commission of Jesus. Remember the Great Commission of Jesus in Matthew 28? Jesus came to them, that is, Jesus came to his disciples and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." So just before Jesus ascends, he gives his disciples a mission. Go. Go and make disciples. That is, go and proclaim the gospel. Go and tell people about how it is that they can be saved from eternal peril by trusting in me, says Jesus. Go and tell them about how I died for them so that they could be forgiven of their sins and have eternal life. Go and do that so that they can be saved just as you're saved. The disciples were to be in the life-saving business. And as people heard that good news and became followers of Jesus, Jesus says to his disciples, baptize them so that they publicly identify as my followers, but also I want you to teach them to obey everything I've commanded you. That includes things like love of neighbour, etc. But it also includes the command to go and make disciples. You see, friends, we are meant to be disciple-making disciples. We are meant to be in the business of life-saving for eternity. That's what we're meant to be about. But what the parable of the life-saving station tells us is that what often happens in churches is that churches start off well, but then over time drift away from their mission because of things like laziness or comfort or self-centeredness. And the purpose of today, friends, the purpose of this Vision Day is to make sure that we as a church don't end up like that. The purpose of today is to make sure that we remember that first and foremost, we are a life-saving station. And so I want to highlight to you some ongoing actions that will help us not to drift away from being committed to fulfilling the Great Commission. I'm going to highlight 4 for you. First of all, we need to be learning from the Bible and applying it to our lives. We've got to keep learning the gospel, friends, not because we need to be saved if we already are, but to keep remembering that we were sinners who were saved by Christ and that we should be living our lives for Him. And we need to keep learning from the Bible about how it is that Jesus wants to live, including helping others to become disciples. We need to keep learning and remembering those things. As Lionel said, we need to do this in order to keep the main thing the main thing. The Bible must be at the centre of what we're doing. But also, we need to be praying to God for the help we need to serve Him faithfully. Because the reason why life-saving stations become clubs is because they're tempted to be lazy. They're tempted to be selfish. They're tempted to want comfort rather than to please Christ. And so we need to pray, Lord, please help us to withstand these temptations. Help us to stand firm. Help us to grow in holiness. Help us to do what it is that we're meant to be doing. And indeed, I keep saying, don't I? Prayer is the chief work of mission, because God is the chief agent of mission. Friends, as we're seeking to see lives saved, as 1 Corinthians 3 says, it's God who gives the growth. We need to keep praying to God that He would be at work to bring that about. We need to be spurring one another on and encouraging one another. If you see someone who's slackening off, we should be getting alongside them saying, come on, let's keep going. There are people out there who need to hear about Jesus. There are people who are headed for hell unless they hear the gospel from us. Come on, let's do it. And today is meant to be a day where hopefully we spur you on. But also we need to encourage one another. And if we hear good stories about how God is at work in and through us, we should be sharing those things so we can be heartened by what it is that we're hearing. But finally, and this might sound controversial, today I want to suggest we need to be using good tools produced by worldly wisdom, designed to help organisations stay focused on and act in line with their mission. You'll notice I've got James 1:17 written there on the screen. James 1:17 says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above." It's from above. You see, friends, the Bible is very clear that God is sovereign over everything. He's in control of all things. The Bible is also very, very clear that God is gracious. He treats us in ways that we simply do not deserve. He has done that by providing a way for us to be saved through the Lord Jesus Christ. We don't deserve that. But also he does it in lots of other ways too, by making our lives now better than we deserve them to be. And you know what? God is so powerful, he can even work through unbelievers to create, to invent, to produce things that help to make our lives better. Think about things like medicine. They make our lives better, don't they? Think about things like technology. I'm sure that anyone who put washing in a washing machine yesterday is very thankful for that technology rather than having to hand wash everything. Think about the way in which farmers have come up with lots of really wise ideas for how to increase yield so that there's more food to go around. Ultimately, friends, those things might have come from human wisdom, but they ultimately come from God's common grace towards us. And you know what? God, in his common grace, has also given people the wisdom to actually understand how organisations work, how systems work, how these things function, and how they can actually function so that organisations are doing the things they're meant to be doing. And as a church, we're an organisation. And there are good tools that have been created by worldly wisdom, ultimately as a result of God's common grace, that we can use to help us to be focused on our mission so we don't become a club. And in fact, you know what? We're already using some of these tools. Let me talk to you about the good tools produced by worldly wisdom that we're already using. So 2 examples are our mission statement and our vision statement. Our mission statement: to make and mature disciples of Jesus Christ. That's really just a summary of the Great Commission, right? And the idea of a mission statement is, why do we exist? What's our purpose? What are we on about? Well, Jesus told us in Matthew 28 what we're to be on about. Lionel highlighted that from 1 Corinthians as well. We're all to be about proclaiming Christ so that people will become his disciples and grow in maturity. That's our mission. Our vision, the idea of a vision statement is, what's the desired outcome that we're seeking as we fulfill our mission? What are we looking to see happen? Is it that Mark becomes popular? No. Because that's what Paul was arguing against in 1 Corinthians 3, wasn't he? No. What we want to see happen is God's kingdom growing. Not Mark's empire growing or the St. Clement's empire growing. God's kingdom growing. God's name being honoured. We don't want to put people up on pedestals here. We want to put Jesus up on the pedestal, don't we? We want people becoming his followers so that they give him the praise, give him the glory and the honour that he deserves. Now, friends, nowhere in the Bible do we say thou shalt have a mission and vision statement. The Bible doesn't talk about these sorts of things. In fact, mission and vision statements emerged as a result of the work of Peter Drucker in the 1950s to the 1970s. Peter Drucker, management consultant, author, educator, came up with these things to help companies make sure they functioned in the way that they ought to. But friends, we can use these tools to help us be focused on what we're meant to be focused on. And that's what we're doing. Another example is our value statement. This is a shorthand version of the value statement. We value God above all else, the Bible, prayer, all people, meeting together, sharing the good news of Jesus. Friends, a value statement conveys what is important to an organisation, the things that you do not compromise on as an organisation. And so as we engage in the task of making and maturing disciples, praying that God's kingdom would grow and his name would be honoured, we don't budge on these things. But nowhere in the Bible do you find value statements, or thou shalt have a value statement. No, value statements emerged during the 20th century from the combined sources of academic psychology and corporate management theory. Yet we are able to use this good tool to help us to remember in a summary form what is important to us. And so, friends, please be aware that God, in his common grace, enables people, even unbelievers, to come up with really good ideas that can actually help us to keep the main thing, as Lionel said. And today, I want to talk about another good tool produced by Worldly Wisdom that can help us, and that is goal setting. Goal setting. Lionel talked about how the Apostle Paul had goals. He highlighted that from 1 Corinthians. As I've read Romans recently, I see that Paul had a goal to strengthen the Christians in Rome when he kind of met up with them. He had another goal to spread the gospel to places where it had not been spread. He especially wanted to go to Spain. But the kinds of goals that are talked about today are a bit different to the kind of goals that the Apostle Paul sort of talked about in Romans and 1 Corinthians. Friends, the activity of goal setting today normally draws from the goal setting theory developed by Edwin Locke and Gary Latham in the second half of the 20th century. So as a lot of people today talk about goal setting, it's based on this work. And what did Locke and Latham talk about with respect to goal setting? Well, in summary, according to this theory, goals must be specific, measurable, and easily understood rather than vague. So you say to a salesperson, increase your sales by 10%, not do better. Okay? And so a lot of the goals that are used today have numbers attached to them because they need to be measurable, according to Locke and to Latham. Now, there are benefits that come with having such goals. And I'm going to talk about those in a moment. But the first thing I want to highlight is that there is a difference between vision and goals. There is a difference between vision and goals. So I just want to kind of highlight this so you're clear that when I talk about our vision, you understand what we're talking about there. When I talk about goals, you understand what I'm talking about there. They're different things, but both focus on the future. So a vision is an aspirational, long-term picture of a desired future serving as the end in mind or the inspiration. So our vision, God's kingdom growing, God's name being honoured, that's very much a long-term kind of idea. Okay? Goals, on the other hand, are the specific, measurable and transactional steps taken to achieve that vision. They're much more short-term or medium-term things which have the desire to actually help fulfill the ultimate vision. Now, let me just give you a concrete example of how this works. So I've come up with a personal vision in recent times. My personal vision is to enjoy good health in older age. Okay, to enjoy good health in older age. That's my long-term sort of vision. Now, I've also, in the last couple of years, come up with goals to help actually bring that vision about. So my doctor made it clear to me that I was a knee replacement candidate unless I lost weight. So I set a goal last year to lose at least 10 kilos. Okay. This year I've also set some goals around exercise to try and run at least 4 times a week and to do weight-bearing exercises at least 3 times a week. So those specific, concrete sort of goals measurable type of goals have been set so I can achieve my long-term vision of good health in older age. Okay? So that's the difference between them. And research suggests that goal setting helps produce positive outcomes, and especially so if you write your goals down, apparently. People who write their goals down are 42% more likely to fulfill them than those who don't, according to the research. Now let me highlight some of these benefits to you. Goals inspire the devising of strategies and plans. That is, they produce intentionality in us. So I said I wanted to lose 10 kilos last year. So I sat down and said, how am I going to lose 10 kilos? Well, if I'm going to lose 10 kilos, I need to stop doing these things and start doing these things. And so I came up with a plan for how I was going to do it. The goal drove me to think about how is that going to happen. It made me intentional. Goals help direct attention and effort toward relevant activities and away from irrelevant ones. That is, they help us to be disciplined. They help us to have clarity. So it became very, very obvious to me that eating lots of chocolate was a highly irrelevant activity when it came to losing 10 kilos. In fact, there was a whole bunch of things that were in that irrelevant or harmful category that I had to give up. And can I say, most of my basic food group was in those things. And it helped me to see, I need to do this instead. Okay? And so it gave me the discipline to go, I need to do this and not this. It gave me clarity about what I should and shouldn't do. And finally, goals inspire greater physical and mental effort. That is, they inspire commitment. So again, coming back to my dietary thing, can I say losing weight is hard work? And particularly if you've given up certain things that were your basic food group. So if I'm walking past a Lindt chocolate shop, I've got to go evil, poison, okay? It's really, really hard not to walk in there. I've got to be focused. But having the goal helps me to actually push myself to say no to that. There are times where I'd be feeling hungry and I think, oh, look at all those things in the cupboard. But the goals help me to go, no. They inspired greater physical and mental effort on my part. And friends, I want to suggest to you that, that goals can help us as a church to be intentional about the things that we are to be intentional about, to be disciplined in the things that we should be doing and not doing the things that we shouldn't be doing, to be committed to really going above and beyond, even though we might feel tired, even though it might be hard work. Goals can help us in those ways. But I also want to suggest to you that research suggests that churches that have a vision and goals are more likely to grow than those that don't. And there are 4 things that I want to say about this point. And the first is that research shows that churches have life cycles. Churches have life cycles. And here is my crude attempt at a drawing to describe a church's life cycle. So there have been thousands upon thousands of churches that have been looked at, and not all are exactly the same, but most tend to have this kind of life cycle over a 60 to 80 year kind of period. Okay, so a church starts, and the church normally sort of starts with some kind of vision, some kind of goals to reach people or whatever. Okay, and the church tends to experience a time of growth after it started. Now, what we also know is that the original vision of the church tends to energise it for 20 to 40 years, depending upon how inspiring the vision is. So what happens is that the church starts, they've got this inspiring vision, they've got goals, and so people are inspired by that, they work hard, they're like the life-saving station, going out into the sea, seeing who's there, trying to reach people, and it spurs people on. But that energy from that original vision, those original goals, eventually dissipates as time goes on. It dissipates. If it's a really inspiring vision, it might go on for a lot longer than if it's not as an inspiring a vision. Okay? It dissipates. Casting vision and goals helps churches to start new life cycles. So instead of just sort of running out of energy and plateauing and really becoming like what the Life Saving Station became, a club that just really focused on its members and then eventually declined. No, if you recast vision, set new goals, that actually helps to stop a church from plateauing and instead to start a new life cycle, to have energy that is needed to be able to get stuck in again and keep doing the things that we're meant to be doing. And the final thing I want to say about this is that the best time for a church to try and start a new life cycle is just before it hits the plateau stage. Just before it hits the plateau stage. That's the best time. Because the further you go along the plateau stage and even into the decline stage, the harder it gets to recast that vision, to get goals happening. Because remember what happened in the parable of the Life Saving Station? The Life Saving Station became a club, which became very much inward focused. And so it's very, very hard if churches are like that to start looking outward again and to have that new life cycle occur. But it doesn't mean that it's impossible. Indeed, friends, that's the story of here in recent years. When I arrived here in 2012, the truth is the church had seen better days. We were the young family when we turned up. So Tiana Zhang was here, who's similar age to one of my kids. Michael Brady was here. But really, that was it. We were the young family. And I remember reading the prospectus about the church that the nominating team gave me. And one of the statements that really stood out to me was, we've worked hard, but we're now we're really feeling quite tired. People look back on the days when Simon Manchester was here and there were a lot of people here, or when Peter Watson was here and lots of things were going on, but it just now wasn't quite the same. But we had a consultation in the start of 2013 with Paul Borden, American Baptist consultant. A number of you were here when we did it. And one of the things that Paul pointed out in his report to us was that our church didn't have an explicit mission. It didn't have an explicit vision or goals towards reaching that vision. And so he gave us a mission statement, which is very similar to the one we now have. He taught us how to cast vision and to set goals and think about strategies. And so we started doing that. We started trying things that we hadn't done before. We decided we needed to be much more outward focused, and we tried to engage in the communities in different ways. We changed the whole layout inside this building. There were lots of different things that we did as a result of that, and lo and behold, people started turning up. Young families started arriving. People became Christians. And from 2013 onwards, we started to see this steady growth in the life of our church until COVID hit. COVID hit. Some people never came back. Around about 12 people died in our church life during that period. Some ended up in aged care. Some made the decision that now was as good a time as any to maybe start going to a church closer to where they were, or to move out of Sydney altogether and go to other places. And so when we came back after COVID, to me it felt a bit like a bushfire had gone through. And rebuilding needed to start. And so we did start, just gradually rebuilding, little bit by little bit, getting things up and running again, getting things going. You might remember I talked about, this is the year we catch our breath, things like that. And we just sort of started doing that. But friends, I want to say now is the time to recast the vision and to set new goals. Now is the time to look for a new life cycle of growth in the life of our church. Indeed, the strategic planning team is very, very firmly in the belief of that. And so what I am really here to do today is to announce to you on behalf of the strategic planning team a new goal designed to help us with the fulfilling of our vision, the 300 by 30 vision goal. I want to stress it's called vision goal because I want to be really, really, really clear that this goal is meant to be helping us work towards the fulfilling of our vision. Our vision, which is God's kingdom growing, God's name being honoured, okay? That's what this goal is working towards. I want to be really, really clear on that. This goal should never, ever be divorced from our vision because this goal is all about trying to help see our vision fulfilled. 300 by 30, what does that mean? Well, let me give you the long form of this vision goal, and that is to grow to be a church of at least 300 people by the end of 2030. That's the goal, to grow to be a church of at least 300 people by the end of 2030. Now, we have some associated goals within this vision goal. We have yearly goals. So at the end of 2025, we're a church of about 150. And so by the end of this year, we would love to see us at 165, and then to grow by 20, by 30, by 40, by 45. They're yearly goals. Now at this point, some of you might say, whoa, there's some dangers here, right? We're setting a goal like this because it's about how big our church will be. It's not talking about the kingdom explicitly. Again, friends, this is why it's called vision goal. Because if we want to see the kingdom grow, our church needs to get bigger. Indeed, Andrew Hurd, who's the pastor of EV Church up on the Central Coast, was interviewed on a podcast recently. He said this: if we're going to reach this country, we need to own the fact that we either need to see every church get much bigger, or we need many, many more churches, or both. Friends, if we want to reach the country, if we want to see God's kingdom grow, churches need to grow. And we need lots more churches too. Friends, as God's kingdom grows, God's churches will grow. And as God's churches grow, so they're in a position to be able to help with more kingdom growth. Friends, the two are very much intertwined. Now, of course, there is always a danger that, if God's church grows, if our church grows in this way, we sit back and go, aren't we great? Look at us, we're better than other churches. But again, friends, remember, it's about God's kingdom growing, God's name being honoured. Not our church being honoured, not me as a minister being honoured. It's all about God's name being honoured. Because he's worthy of all glory and power, isn't he? For he created all things, and by his will we exist and have our being. He is the one who saved us. And so I want to be really, really clear, friends. The aim of this goal is God's kingdom growing, God's name being honoured. It's not about growing the St. Clement's Empire or anything like that. No, we want God's kingdom to grow. I mentioned last year, we want to be a sending church, a church that sends people out to do the wider work of mission. We want to do that. But friends, we also want the church to grow because we want God's kingdom to grow. Now, in terms of growth, I want to talk about the three types of growth that will help fulfill the 300 by 30 vision goal. The first is what's called transfer growth. Transfer growth. And the idea of transfer growth is where people transfer from one church and start going to another church. That's what transfer growth is. Can I say, if we reach 300 by the end of 2030, purely by transfer growth, we have not helped fulfill our vision at all. In fact, it's my least favourite type of growth. Doesn't mean it's bad. So let me pick on our two MCs for today, Dave and Mel. Okay. So Mel and her family were transfers. They moved up from Melbourne a few years ago, and they figured it was going to be too hard to keep going back to church in Melbourne, so they thought we better come to a church closer by. What a great transfer that was. Because here they are helping us, trying to make them mature disciples. I'm going to pick on Dave now. So Dave and Sarah and the family were living in Layla Park but going to church at Toongabbie. And they kind of figured out, well, if we're going to invite people to go to church, it's probably easier to invite them to come to Layla Park than Toongabbie. And so they said, we'll start coming here. That's a good transfer. I was sorry for Toongabbie, but good transfer. People who say, I'm going to transfer because my church painted its walls blue and I didn't like that, and so I want to come to your church instead because you got white walls. No. I say to them, please go back. Okay? But some of the growth will be transfer growth. And some transfer growth is good. But again, that's not really what we're after. I'd love to see biological growth, but for some, the miracle of Abraham and Sarah is going to have to happen, okay, if that's going to take place. I think I'm right in saying 4 children have been born to church members in my time here. I think that's right. Some have sort of snuck in when they were babies, but they weren't actually born while they were here. It'd be great to see biological growth. Indeed, we want to raise up future generations of people who are going to be a part of God's kingdom, don't we? And so, yep, biological growth would be great. Again, some of you just can't do that. That's okay. But the key one is conversion growth. Conversion growth. If we want God's kingdom to grow, the 300 by 30 vision goal has got to be all about people coming to faith in Jesus and then starting to come to our church because they've become followers of Jesus and now want to live in obedience to him. That's the key. And so the strategic planning team has also proposed that we actually embrace another goal, a goal from the Anglican Church of Sydney. The Anglican Church of Sydney's conversion growth goal. We've talked about this at Synod in recent years. There's been great concern expressed at Synod, so where all the different Anglican churches come together, that Anglican churches as a whole, we're not growing. We're certainly not keeping up with population growth. Okay? We're not keeping up with that. And so the Anglican Church said, you know what, even though 1 Corinthians 3 is very clear that God gives the growth, that God is the one who enables people to become followers of Jesus, even though that's the case, the Anglican Church said, we want to set a goal to make sure that we are very much focused on doing evangelism in our churches. So again, God gives the growth, but the purpose of this goal is to make sure we are focused on being a life-saving station. And so the Anglican Church's conversion growth goal is this, a little bit convoluted, but I'll explain it. Number of people becoming Christians through our church in the current year equals at least 5% of the average weekly church attendance of the previous year. Okay, I'll say it again. Number of people becoming Christians through our church in the current year is equal to at least 5% of the average weekly church attendance of the previous year. Now, let me make all of this concrete. Last year, our average weekly church attendance here was 116.63. Can I say I keep very accurate stats? And this number does not include people who have doubled up or tripled up on a day. So I very, very specifically take that out. So we have a very accurate understanding of exactly how many people are here on each going Sunday. So remember, we're a church of about 150. And so that means there's about 33 people away every week. I'll let you just ponder on that. 5% of that is 5.8315. I figure you can't have a 0.8315 type of person unless that's biological growth. And so the conversion goal for 2026 is really 6 people. 6 people. So at least 6 people. Now again, I want to stress, God gives the growth. I can preach the most amazing, persuasive, compelling sermon of all time, but unless God's Spirit is at work in the life of a person, they won't come to faith. Again, that's why prayer is the chief work of what we do. Okay? We recognise that God gives the growth. But this number is meant to push us to say, If our church grows, transfer growth is not at the end of the day what cuts it. What we're after is conversion growth. Conversion growth. And so this year we'd love to see at least 15 people start coming along to this church, or to grow by at least 15. But this number is really, really key. At least 6 people. We want more. And so the point of this goal, it should be driving us to say, who can I invite to the next Introduction to Christianity course? Who can I invite to come along to church to hear about the gospel? Who can I talk with about Jesus? In fact, as I've been thinking about this, Ben has recently taken over my Tuesday night Bible study group. And I thought, well, we've got this goal. I could just have Tuesday night off, sit back, relax. I thought, no, I'm going to start going to Caravan, the dinner across the road. I'm going to start going there every Tuesday night. And I'm going to see who I can meet over there and help become a follower of Jesus Christ. So that's the impact that goal's had on me. It's actually kind of given me impetus to go, no, let's go and do this. And I hope it does the same for you. So what have I been saying to this point? Well, I've been arguing that good tools produced by worldly wisdom can help us to be faithful to the Great Commission. Remember, we want to be the life-saving station, not a club. And so things like mission, vision statements, value statements can help us to remember why we exist, the desired outcome that we're after, the things that are important. And notice that everything that's in our mission, vision, and value statements, it's all taken from the Bible. And we are trying to use these tools to make sure that the main thing is the main thing. That Jesus is the main thing. That the growth of his kingdom is the main thing. That God's name being honoured is the main thing. And today, we've launched a vision goal. And the purpose of the 300 by 30 vision goal and its associated goals is to help our vision of God's kingdom growing and God's name being honoured be fulfilled. Again, we're not wanting to see church growth so that we can sit back and go, how great are we? No, we want God's name being honoured. And we're not just content with lots more people coming from other churches to hear and grow. No, we want God's kingdom growing. And that's what this 300 by 30 vision goal and its associated goals are all about. Trying to make sure we are being intentional, disciplined, and committed to seeing God's kingdom growing, God's name being honoured. Now, friends, the strategic planning team presents this vision goal to you today. But ultimately, the goal won't do anything unless you buy in. Unless you buy in. Unless you work towards it. And so here's the question I want to ask you today. Are you willing to endorse the 300 by 30 vision goal and its associated goals and do the things within your control to help them be fulfilled? Are you willing to endorse it and do the things within your control to help them be fulfilled? Now, I stress within your control. Again, we can't make people become Christians. We can certainly invite them to evangelistic events. We can be praying for them. We can be loving them. We can be seeking to share the good news of Jesus with them. We can do those things. God gives the growth. But are we willing to embrace this mission so we can have a new life cycle so that God's kingdom will grow and God's name will be honoured? Now, to that end, we have a poster, which is here, okay, with 300 by 30 on it. And we have lots of these things called pens. And what we want you to do to show your endorsement is to sign. To sign it. And we'll hang this up in the foyer somewhere so that week by week we keep remembering we're pursuing this vision goal. We're pursuing this goal so that God's kingdom will grow and so that God's name will be honoured. And so I'm going to sign my name on it. because I'm right behind it. If I can actually open the pen. There we go. There's my signature. Over the course of today, we'll leave this in the foyer. You can't tell it's my name, can you? See, before I came and worked here, I worked as an academic registrar at Sydney Missionary and Bible College, the job that Dave now does. And it's a job that destroys your signature because you have to sign so many documents. It just really does. So I've signed it. We would love you to show your endorsement of this by signing up as well. But it's one thing to sign it and then walk away. But we also want you to be committed to it. Ben preached a couple of weeks ago, didn't he, from Matthew 25, about the parable of the gold bags. Remember that? And he talked about as we wait for Jesus to return, what are we to do now? We are to maximize our master's assets to help his kingdom to grow. What we're asking you today, friends, is please maximize your master's assets. Now, some of you might be sitting there going, I've really got the foot down all the way and I'm trying as hard as I can. And I know that there are people who are. There's the old saying, 20% of people do 80% of the work in the church. We want 100% maximising their master's assets. All of us have a role to play. So we'd love you to endorse this, and we'd love you to maximise your master's assets to help make it a reality, because we want God's kingdom to grow and God's name to be honoured. Do I have time for questions, Dave? Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? You can always come chat with me over morning tea if you'd rather, or lunch if you'd rather not speak out loud. Okay, I'll hand it over to you, David Wallace.